Hey, what's up guys? Just purchased a brand new miter saw. Want to show you the process for quickly calibrating a miter saw, making sure it's all squared up, cutting accurately, and getting it ready for production quickly. The first thing you want to do as soon as you purchase a miter saw and take it out of the package is check the base. Some miter saws are just so bad that they should be returned to the store. I have a Lee Valley straight edge here, very nice straight edge. That's what I use for my miter saw calibration. But throw that baby down on the base and I was shocked. This one was absolutely perfect out of the box. A lot of times the base will sit lower or higher than the side wings here and things aren't quite perfect. But if you get one this flat, that's a great sign. The next thing that is absolutely crucial, if this isn't correct, your miter saw will never cut correctly. Your back fence has got to be in perfect alignment. Now, a lot of people hoot and holler about how accurate the Festool Capex is, but I had a Capex, maybe even two Capexes, where these fences were not in alignment and you could not calibrate the saw no matter what you did, because if you calibrated it to one side of the fence, it was off whenever you cut on the other side of the fence. So these have got to be perfectly in line back here. This saw is fantastic. I will add, what do you do if the fences aren't in alignment? You return the saw to the store because, again, there's nothing you can do about it. There's no fixes that you're really going to be able to make for that. There are a lot of ways to calibrate a miter saw. This video is really focusing on calibrating a miter saw fast and quickly. We're not going to spend a ton of time on this. So my first tip, get a good, reliable square to use that you know is perfectly accurate for your calibrating. Really makes it easy to calibrate a saw this way. This is a woodpecker square. Basically, the only thing I use this square for is calibrating miter saws. The first thing we want to look at is the 0-degree detent. We want to see if it's going to cut square or not. To do that, simply going to take our square, plop it down, drop the blade. Again, it's important to use a good quality blade also that's nice and stiff. Put it up against there and you can even just sight and see how it looks. Now then, take your blade on the opposite side, drop it down there as well. See how that looks. If it looks good, you're probably going to be cutting square. So what do we do if the saw is not cutting square? Well, then it gets a little bit tedious. We have to adjust our detent plate here. You'll notice that there are 4 screws holding down this plate. You'll have to loosen those and move the plate ever so slightly until you get your detent square. Now, I recommend getting it as close as possible to your square, and then there's a test that you can do. So I've got a board here. I ran one side through the jointer, and then I took and ran the other side very carefully through the table saw. A lot of you have probably seen this. This is a basic calibration test to see if your saw is cutting square. One side is jointed, the other side is perfectly parallel at the same width. We'll hold it down very carefully and cut it in half. Now, we can flip it over and put it together. And this looks pretty good. We've got a very slight gap here on the back, but quite frankly, it's probably going to be good enough. Guys, if you know me very well in the past, I have done a long series on miter saw calibration that goes very in-depth. That's not what I'm trying to do in this video. I want to do more of a short calibration video. But if you want to really get into the weeds on calibrating a miter saw accurately, search Insider Carpentry, miter saw calibration. You'll see some different videos and a whole playlist on really getting a miter saw dialed in. The next thing that we want to do is we want to check our 45-degree miter cut. So again, I'm going to use my square, put it against the blade here, just see how that looks on the inside. This looks really good. Same thing over here. Drop it down and see how it looks. Now, one thing, this is a little bit too long. It's contacting my teeth on the miter saw a little bit more than I'd like. This is a 2-piece square. So I'm going to go ahead and take it apart. I'm going to use the smaller piece just so I can get it a little bit tighter to the miter saw. And as you can see, that looks pretty good right there. Again, if you really want to get your miters dialed in, check out my other video. You can do a 4-piece picture frame test, and that'll accentuate how far your saw is out of calibration based on the gaps that you see as you make a mitered 4-sided picture frame. If you do find that your 45-degree detents are out of place, double check and ensure that your 0-degree detent is perfect. Again, if it is perfect, at that point, you've got to start loosening your side bolts here and moving it in and out ever so slightly to get that dialed in. If worse comes to worse and you have a really bad saw, you can file the inside of these detents a little bit, but I wouldn't recommend going that far. That's really only for extreme cases. We've got our miters dialed in. Now we need to check the vertical aspect of the saw, which would be the bevel. We want to ensure that the blade is perfectly square and perpendicular to the base of the saw. So again, we've got our trustworthy square right here. We'll move this over into the blade just to see where it's at. I will tell you, if there is one adjustment on the saw that you're likely to have to make right out of the box, this is going to be the one, but it's also very easy to get this calibrated. As you know, miter saws have stops, so whenever you adjust your bevel over, right here it is hitting a stop. If your saw isn't square, on a DeWalt, there's this bolt right here that you can turn, and that moves the stop in one direction or another, so you can adjust it in either direction that you need. So what I do is I take my square right here, and if it's off, I'll just keep adjusting this bolt, and I'll keep moving this square back and forth until it's perfect. After that, you can perform a vertical cut test doing the same flip technique that we did before on the base. So out of the box, this particular saw was a decent amount out of square, so I got that adjusted just using my square technique going back and forth. So now let's use the flip test here and see how accurate it is. So that looks pretty stinking good. So I'm really happy with that. Doesn't take anything fancy to do this. Again, just a trustworthy square and a little bit of patience going back and forth. You can get a saw dialed in very accurately just using your eye. So there's one other thing I actually forgot to mention before, and that is to check how square your fences are to the base. Now, I will tell you that this is not going to be perfect on all the miter saws that I've used. It's just never perfect. It's part of the design aspect of it because these fences have to be able to move. They're just not going to be perfectly square. So you can still get a general idea of how they look, but you can see here with my auxiliary fences on here, that's not ideal. And you'll notice, you might not be able to see it, but as you tighten these down, it'll also adjust how square it is or isn't kind of going in and out. If you come over here to this side, this one is actually much better. So I find that doesn't really affect things too much. In my workflow, we are still working with wood, which is a very imperfect material. It's got all kinds of bumps and dips and crowns and twists in it. So if you can just get a miter saw pretty close, it's gonna be good and it's gonna produce good results. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. It was really designed to be a crash course in getting a miter saw calibrated. Two things. Number one, a lot of carpenters never even check their miter saws to see if they're cutting accurately. It doesn't take very long, 10 minutes with a square like this, and you can get a saw cutting really well. Doesn't have to be machinist level perfect, but for carpentry, close is gonna be good enough. We're working with wood, it's an imperfect material. If you can get it to where it's lined up with this square, you're gonna be cutting pretty good. Second thing, if you take the time to get a miter saw calibrated, in my experience, unless you're gonna drop it down the stairs, it'll stay calibrated for a really long time. The miter saw that I'm using now, I've been using for probably 3 or 4 years. After I calibrated it the first time, it stayed true the entire time. So take a little time after you buy it, get it dialed in. Hope this video helps. Drop me a comment. Let me know what you think in the comment section. Otherwise, we'll see you on the next video.